Hello everyone, welcome to the channel if you're new, welcome back if you aren't, I'm EDJ. Last time we saw the beginning of the civil wars after Caesar and how everything's going crazy. Octavian and Antony are against each other, but now they're seemingly for each other. Legions who are all under Caesar are fighting for both sides. Caesar's assassins and the Pompeian side is kind of resurrected. It is chaos, as befits a civil war. So, is a chaos on all fronts. Politics, warfare, just everything. Even I was having a hard time keeping track of everything. But I want to keep going. I want to see what makes Octavian and Antony the monsters. So let's just get to it, guys. I don't have much else to add. If you want to watch this without me talking, links in the description. Let's get to it.
Following the Battle of Mutina, the Roman Republic was at a crossroads in history. Lepidus and Antony, facing a revived Pompeian faction, thanks largely to Cicero, had allied with one another. Octavian, having been used by the Senate to help fight Antony for them, but receiving little reward or recognition for his actions, had turned his back on the Senate. In this episode, we shall see how these three men would seize ultimate power in Rome. Although both of the consuls for 43 BC, Pansa and Hirtius, had died, leaving the consulship vacant, and Octavian, furious with the Senate that he had not been rewarded for his role in defeating Antony around Mutina, decided to act. In July, he sent an embassy of centurions to Rome, demanding the consulship and that the decree declaring Antony a public enemy to be rescinded. According to Appian, one centurion addressed the Senate with his hand on his sword and proclaimed, "If you do not grant the consulship to Caesar, this will."
Oh dear.
The Senate refused, pointing out that Octavian was too young to legally hold the office. Octavian's delegation countered, citing Pompey, Dolabella, and other examples of underage consuls. Still, the Senate refused. Octavian's men demanded that he march on Rome to claim the consulship. This is yet another clear example of how symbiotic the relationship between a general and his men was in the Roman Republic. The soldiers gave the general power, which in turn led to political power, while a general's political power was tied directly to how effectively and luxuriously he would be able to reward his soldiers. Octavian's men demanding he march on Rome should not therefore be seen as an act of political idealism, but more motivated by the knowledge that if their general was made consul, they could expect far greater rewards. Octavian gladly accepted their petition, marching 8 legions across the Rubicon toward Rome. Caught between the Senate and Antony, it was now clear that Octavian had made his choice of which side he would join. History was repeating itself, with yet another Caesar, which was now Octavian's legal name, marching on Rome. The panicked Senate sent messengers to Octavian saying that he would be granted full command of the army and the right to run for the consulship. However, almost immediately, the senators became ashamed for caving in to blackmail. 2 legions that had been sent from Africa to assist in the war against Antony had just arrived in the city, and there was still 1 legion that had been left by Pansa to protect the city. Cicero rallied the Senate, revoking the previous offer to Octavian. The legions were prepared to defend Rome, and the city was fortified. Octavian's negotiation with the Senate's ambassadors was interrupted by a second delegation rescinding the offer. Immediately, he marched his force to Rome, encamping on the Campus Martius. Seeing the vast force assembled against them, 2 of the 3 legions in Rome lost heart, defecting to him. The senators had been brave to try and organize a defense of the city, but the popularity and power of Octavian was simply too great.
Right.
Shortly after this, rumors circulated that 2 of Octavian's legions had defected, and some senators once again tried to raise legions to confront him. However, the rumors were false. In all likeliness, Octavian himself had been the source of the rumor, seeking to establish who his main opponents in the city were. All of them would be proscribed.
Dang.
Elections for the
Dude, that is smart. find out who your enemies in at the base of Rome, and then get rid of them, right? Smart, man.
Consulship were held, and to nobody's surprise, Octavian was elected alongside Pedius, Caesar's legate, who funded his young heir during the early struggle with Antony. Octavian immediately set about holding trials for those linked to the conspiracy against Caesar, including some men who had not even been in the city at the time. All were unanimously found guilty in the courts presided over by Octavian. One praetor who voted for acquittal would later be proscribed by Octavian. Another was rumored to be plotting to assassinate Octavian and was sent on a ship to be exiled in Africa. The ship never arrived though, disappearing en route. This was just a taste of what was to come. Octavian would not show mercy to his enemies. Meanwhile, the force—
Yeah, just the opposite of Caesar, right? Caesar, whenever he could, would show mercy. Mainly, you know, I guess Octavian probably saw, well, he got killed, so maybe I'll just be as vicious as humanly possible. make them see what Caesar could have been, right?
Forces of Antony, Lepidus, Plancus, Pollio, and Ventidius had combined west of the Alps in Narbonese Gaul, a huge force of 17 legions, with Antony and Lepidus in joint command. Octavian knew that to confront Brutus and Cassius and the immense force that they could amass in the east, he would need the help of these legions. As such, he rescinded the decree that made Antony an enemy of the state and sent letters of friendship to the two men, who both responded in kind. Between the three of them, they held the most powerful army west of the Adriatic, and each knew that they could benefit from cooperation rather than wasting their men fighting one another. Together, they marched on Decimus's position in North Italy. Decimus's legionaries, seeing the writing on the wall, began to abandon him in droves, many turning to either Antony or Octavian. In desperation, Decimus attempted to flee to Macedonia with just his bodyguard, taking a long route through barbarian lands to the north, disguising himself as a Gaul to avoid detection. A Gallic chieftain, loyal to Antony, captured him in September, however, and Decimus was beheaded. It was a severe blow to the Pompeian faction. Decimus had been one of Caesar's most talented subordinates, and was one of the best generals on the Pompeian side. With his death, the Italian peninsula was now effectively in control of the Caesarians. In Italy, in October 43, Antony, Lepidus, and Octavian met on a small island in the Lavinius River, with 5 legions apiece lining the riverbanks. On that small island, they held one of the most important meetings in human history. It was agreed that Octavian would resign his consulship, Ventidius taking his place. Instead, 3 new magistrate positions with almost limitless powers would be created. The trio would hold these offices together for an initial 5 years, could make and annul laws without approval from the Senate or people, and would name the other magistrates for the next 5 years, and their decisions would be immune from veto. The 3 men each effectively would hold the same powers as Caesar had. The provinces west of the Adriatic were
Second triumvirate, baby! Heck yeah!
also to be divided amongst the 3. Antony having control over Transalpine and Cisalpine Gaul, Lepidus all of Hispania and Narbonese Gaul, and Octavian Africa, Sardinia, Sicily, and surrounding islands. It's clear from this division that Octavian was the junior partner. Gaul and Hispania were 2 of the most sought-after provinces, the former for its potential for expansion, the latter for its rich silver mines. Octavian's territory, on the other hand, had little to offer. Moreover, Sicily was contested by Sextus Pompey, and a strong Pompeian presence persisted in Africa. Although he carried a powerful name through his adopted father, Octavian was still not as powerful as his fellow triumvirs. Military plans were also laid down. Lepidus would remain in Rome with 3 legions, while Antony and Octavian would lead the main force to Greece to confront Brutus and Cassius. More darkly, they also planned the proscriptions list, an idea made infamous by the dictator Sulla. A proscription list was a collection of names that was posted publicly. Any man whose name was on the list immediately had their property declared confiscated by the state and was condemned to death. Effectively, state-approved murders. During the last series of proscriptions under Sulla in 83 BC, a young Julius Caesar had been forced into hiding and may well have been proscribed himself. It was partly for this reason that Caesar had refused to carry out similar purges during his dictatorship. Antony, Lepidus, and Octavian were of a different generation, however.
Yeah, these guys were much more brutal. I mean, at least politically, you know. Yeah, they're very much less merciful than I think Caesar was.
The oldest of them, Lepidus, had been just 6 years old during Sulla's reign, and the proscriptions had left a much less marked effect on them. Together, they wrote up the lists, targeting mainly those with political power, but also personal enemies, and those who were rich, and whose confiscated property could thus be used to fuel the war effort. Even friends and family were not safe. Antony's uncle Lucius was added to the list, as was Lepidus's brother. Cicero, the one-time mentor and ally of Octavian, was also proscribed. Though
I also think like Antony like put Cicero's hands on the Senate building, like he nailed his hands there. So, you know. Yeah, you're just seeing this bloodbath. It's like watching a mafia movie, you know? We're gonna put hits out on everyone, but you know, it's like watching like they're like mobsters right now, just murdering everyone. And yeah, this is like insane, man.
Octavian did apparently try to argue against this for 2 days before relenting. It is important to note here that Cassius Dio and Paterculus claim that Octavian only took part because he held similar authority, that he was effectively unwilling, showing himself later to be a merciful man, and that he tried to save many from the proscriptions. However, other sources, such as Appian and Plutarch, do not say this. In their accounts, all 3 men were equally culpable. Dio is well known as being overly flattering to Octavian as a result of his position as a senator in the empire, and thus having a vested interest in having a sympathetic view of the emperor. Paterculus has similar problems, serving during Octavian's reign as emperor under Octavian's grandson, and thus having a personal investment in glorifying him. Their views have proved persistent, but the accounts may well be apologist revisionism, and Appian and Plutarch do not offer the same excuses, both putting Octavian on the same level as Antony and Lepidus. Indeed, Appian says that the terrors that would be inflicted on Rome during this time were all the more remarkable precisely because of Octavian's participation, and Plutarch described the trio as having made a barter of murder for murder. Within just 3 days, the 3 men had planned how to take full control of the Senate, planned a war against the liberators, and had planned the deaths of 300 senators, about a third of the Senate, and 2,000 knights. Unofficially, the second triumvirate had just been formed. After the negotiations, the 3 began to march on Rome. For now, the majority of the proscriptions were put on hold, but there were 17 men who needed to be targeted early, among them Cicero and Salvius, a tribune of the plebs. Cicero, who held the sympathy of the public, managed to elude his hunters, while Salvius was not so lucky. He was found hosting a banquet when soldiers burst in, ordering the guests to remain in their positions, and beheaded the tribune, leaving his guests reclining in shock next to his beheaded corpse.
Oh my gosh. Like I said, like, I like Octavian, by the way. You know, he's my favorite Roman emperor. You've heard me praise him a lot, and I think he's the best Roman emperor. I think he's just one of the greatest politicians that ever lived. But I will admit that his rise was a very brutal thing. Like, you know, a lot of people died, you know. How much of it was justified, I don't know, but it was a bloodbath. The benevolence of Augustus was paved, you know, through the excessive, like almost excessive bloodshed of Octavian, right? And just, yeah, it's insane.
Panic gripped the city shortly afterwards, and Pedius, one of the consuls of the year, publicized the names of the 17 men the triumvirs were hunting, attempting to reassure the public that only those 17 were listed. Pedius died the following day, reportedly of, quote, political fatigue, unquote. But it is not hard to think that he was murdered for having revealed the 17 names. Cicero, having tried to escape Italy by sea, had grown sick and was forced to make land. He was soon found near his villa in Formiae, being carried in a litter. His slaves and other locals had lied about his location to protect him, but he had finally been betrayed by a local shoemaker. A centurion, who Cicero had previously defended, found the now 63-year-old orator. He accepted his death, offering his neck, and was executed. Cicero had been the voice of the Republic.
Yeah, you have to give it to Cicero. The man faced his death with a lot of dignity, you know, surprisingly. And, yeah, I was trying to do some side research on him during this, like, you know, these recordings. And a very accomplished man. And, yeah, overall, very interesting. I'm gonna have to do more research, obviously, on him. But I think he's a very, very interesting dude.
Whether one agrees or disagrees with his actions or politics, he was a brave man who, when surrounded by swords, tried to defend his republic with a pen. In the words of Paterculus, "You took from Marcus Cicero a few anxious days, a few senile years, a life which would have been more wretched under your dominion than was his death in your triumvirate. But you did not rob him of his fame, the glory of his deeds and words. Nay, you but enhanced them. He lives and will continue to live in the memory of the ages, and so long as the universe shall endure, this universe, which he saw with eye of his mind, grasped with his intellect, and illuminated with his eloquence, shall be accompanied by the fame of Cicero."
Dang, that is quite the statement to make about someone. But yeah, he has, obviously we know him today, so his legacy has endured.
His head and his hands, with which he'd written such damning speeches against Antony, were nailed to the rostra where he had given so many speeches. The triumvirs entered Rome over 3 days, each bringing a bodyguard and legion, completely disregarding the law prohibiting arms in the city. A tribune of the plebs, Publius Titius, proposed the law that would give extraordinary powers to Antony, Lepidus, and Octavian. With their legions and bodyguard prowling the city, the bill was swiftly passed. The second triumvirate was now legally established. Overnight, lists appeared in the forum with the names of the condemned. A reward was also offered, 2,500 denarii for each head of a proscribed man brought to the triumvirs. Rewards were also offered for information on a wanted man's location, while any person harboring a fugitive would also be added to the list. The gates of Rome were blocked by soldiers, and the proscriptions began in earnest. Appian's account of the proscriptions is harrowing. Men hid in sewers, wells, chimneys, ovens, wherever they could, before being discovered, dragged out, and executed by their hunters.
Dude, this is literally like the purge. Like, this is just a complete purge. And yeah.
And even hid himself in a dung heap. The soldiers, disgusted and unwilling to reach in for him, simply stabbed the heap with spears until he emerged, then promptly beheaded him. Brothers holding on to one another.
Oh, that's awful, but that's so undignified. It's almost funny. I'm so sorry.
Executed together in one swing of a sword. Shockingly, even children were not safe.
Holy crap.
Orphans whose parents had left them with large amounts of money were also added to the list. One was found at his school with his tutor. When the hunters burst into his classroom, the tutor tried to shield the young boy with his body, but both were cut down without mercy.
Holy crap.
Night after night, the proscription lists were expanded, so none truly knew if they were safe or not. Gangs roamed the city, looking for any of the proscribed, and any opportunity to loot abandoned houses. Fear was rampant. Wives, siblings, and friends informed on their loved ones, and no one was sure who could be trusted. Even some children, eager for their inheritance, reported on their fathers. With so many being killed.
Oh my gosh, that is insane. Just Rome has become a complete bloodbath, you know? Wow, that's like frightening. That's like dystopian in a way, right? Just or Orwellian, I guess, you know, with the children betraying their parents, but man, the second triumvirate, man, these guys are wilding right now.
Many seized the opportunity to settle old scores, murdering their rivals under the pretense that they had been proscribed. Many simply gave in, either handing themselves over in order to try and protect their families, or simply waiting for death. Others decided to take fate into their own hands, jumping off rooftops or bridges. Statius, an 80-year-old senator, opened the doors of his house to the public and invited them to take anything they wanted. Once his property had been stripped, he burnt it with himself inside. Many wives also killed themselves over the bodies of their husbands, entire families being eradicated. Among these horrors, there were also acts of extraordinary bravery. A senator named Capito, for example, fought in the narrow passage of his doorway, cutting down a number of his hunters before being overwhelmed and butchered. Sons faked the deaths of their fathers and then smuggled them out, one carrying his elderly father on his shoulders. The slave of one senator, upon hearing that soldiers were coming for his master, swapped outfits with his master and took his place in his bed. The soldiers arrived and killed the slave where he lay, the senator dressed as a slave standing nearby. Antony's mother, Julia, was outraged that her brother Lucius had been added to the list and confronted Antony, defiantly declaring that she would protect her brother and that he would have to kill her too if he wanted his uncle dead. Antony relented, Lucius's life being saved. When the triumvirs announced an unheard-of-before tax upon women, Hortensia, the daughter of a famous lawyer, rallied the women and confronted the triumvirs. She insisted that if Rome were fighting a foreign power, the women would gladly support the state. But in civil wars may we never contribute nor ever assist you against each other. Given the current political climate, it was an incredibly brave act. The triumvirs needed money, and the confiscation of prescribed property was intended to solve this. Through such grisly methods, the triumvirs accumulated huge amounts of property, but they struggled to sell them. Many of the richest men were now dead, and many were terrified to bid on the properties, lest they also be seen as having money and being added to the lists.
Oh boy, yeah.
Thanks to Hortensia, the tax on women was only enforced upon 400 of Rome's richest, forcing the triumvirs to compensate by forcing male property owners to lend money to the state. Some men did escape the proscriptions, many flocking to the banners of Sextus Pompey in Sicily or Brutus and Cassius in the east. Sextus even went so far as to offer his own rewards for those that helped proscribed men escape to him. As a result, Sextus, whose situation so far had been rather weak, had an influx of powerful men into his faction, including many who had seen military service, greatly strengthening.
Man, it is wild to still see Sextus around. Like, this dude's been around forever. Like, since the first Civil War, and he carries into the next one. Just, again, the dude's persistent. Like, I'm surprised he never gave up.
His position. With many of the most powerful men in Rome either dead or having fled the country, Antony, Lepidus, and Octavian were left in complete command of Rome. The proscriptions, which began in November of 43 BC, continued for months into 42 BC, and cemented the Second Triumvirate as the masters of Rome. The First Triumvirate, consisting of Crassus, Pompey, and Caesar, had wielded power through the influence of the three men. It had been founded upon a base of mutual opportunism, had been largely bloodless, and while the three men unofficially ruled Rome,
these guys were like, when watching the original early videos, how they were, you know, like, very politically savvy, and then you're watching the Second Triumvirate, they're like, well, time to kill everyone. They just go in and start murdering everyone. You do see a clear difference, right?
Kept at least the facade of the Republican Constitution. Even the dictatorship of Caesar had relied far more on the political alliances and debts created by Caesar than terror. The second triumvirate was different. It was ratified by law, effectively making Lepidus, Antony, and Octavian simultaneous dictators in all but name, and was founded upon fear and death. The purges were appalling for people at the time. By these means, the Caesarian party had seized control of Rome. In the east, however, Brutus and Cassius had been raising a colossal army and consolidating their position. History once again was about to repeat itself, with the Caesarian and Pompeian parties again fighting a battle to decide Rome's fate in Greece. We will talk about this battle in our next episode.
So yeah, I will, obviously, this was very brutal. The second triumvirate are just so, like I said, I keep saying brutal, but I don't know what else to say. It's like, so much bloodshed, and you really do see this with civil wars all the time, right? There's just so much blood and killing in the political scape, like where Caesar would have preferred to keep the peace and, the pretext of not being tyrannical at all, and showing mercy. You see these three men are like, no, we're not even gonna keep up the facade. We're just going in. We're taking it. No mercy to our enemies. Just much more straightforward is all I'm saying. And once again, the Pompeian and Caesarian legacies just continually fighting until, as we know, the Caesarian ways just overcome. So yeah, we're going to be seeing that specifically next video, so I'll be seeing you guys next time as we get into, I guess, more specific battles between, the Caesarians and, the Pompeians. So I'll see you then, everyone. Bye.